Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Pooja Walia Man from SGI Samalkhan. Today we are going to talk on the module Managing Waiting Lines from the paper Services Marketing. In this module, you will learn meaning of waiting lines, types of waiting lines, components of waiting lines, the waiting line configurations, and the queue discipline. So let us talk about what do we understand by the term waiting lines. A number of service marketers develop a competitive advantage of working at minimum time for the delivery of the services to the consumers. However simple it may sound, trust me, it is the most difficult aspect to implement in the service production and delivery. With an increased customer and the subscriber base comes profits and also comes the problems of satisfying the consumers by ensuring a quick service to all of them. Let us take an example. A newly opened fast food service restaurant in the busy commercial area of central Delhi was in the process of designing a marketing strategy to beat the competition. The first suggestion was to offer good quality and hygienic food with a broad Indian and continental food menu for the consumers to choose from. The second suggestion was to make the ambience comfortable and lively for professionals, family, and youngsters who visit. The last and the most important suggestion was to reduce the waiting time of the consumers to a minimum of 2 to 3 minutes for the order to be delivered. The first two suggestions were instantly accepted and were considered easy to be implemented. But the reduction of the waiting time was felt to be the most critical and difficult to be put in practice. The same may be felt by most of the service industry players like banks, saloons, car service, etc. Thus, management of waiting line is very important. It refers to ensuring a quick service to the consumers by maintaining the overall service quality at competitive prices. It is difficult to implement as the consumer walk-in may be random and the service requirement of each consumer may also be random. Since the services are not stored, there is no way to keep the inventory ready for a quick supply during peak hours. And this is what makes the issue of managing the waiting lines worth discussing. One might think of opening more counters to manage more consumers at a time. But this is a layman approach to spending more money. The counters may not be utilized during off-period, thus adding the cost without adequate returns. Successful managers in any service organization are the ones who are able to creatively design ways and means of reducing the waiting times and engrossing the consumers while the service is being delivered to them. Waiting lines can be of many types. Let us look at them one by one. The first type of waiting line is the finite waiting line. There may be a finite group of consumers expected to visit the service counter during the day. The number of consumers served will be deducted from the overall queue, thus shortening the overall waiting line. For example, you must have come across the waiting lines at banks or at the retail outlets for checking out. However, the same consumer may revisit the service counter, which will increase the overall size of the finite population over a period of time. But at one point of time, the line will get shortened. The second type of waiting line is the infinite waiting line. These are services in which the number of consumers visiting in a day may not be accurately guessed. Further, such consumers may not leave the queue even if they are served once. Why? Because they may want to order another service. For instance, the beauty salons and spas. Having taken one service, the consumer may wish to take another service. Thus, the line may not instantly get shortened. The third type of a waiting line is the physical waiting lines. As the name suggests, these are the queues in which the prospective consumer is physically present to be served at the counter of any service organization. We move ahead. The next type of a waiting line is a virtual waiting line. Now here, what do we understand by a virtual? This means these are the queues in which a subscriber may be put on hold on phone for the want of some information. The queue may not be physically visible, but it is through the voicemail that somebody has been put into a queue. The next type is a single location. Single location, therefore it means when a service is being provided through a single location counter. Another type of a waiting line is dispersed location. Now, students, you might find it amusing. How can a waiting line be dispersed? Well, a service organization may be serving its consumers through geographically dispersed locations. Not clear? Let's take an example. On-call taxi services are actually providing services to the passengers who may be waiting at different locations to be picked up by the taxi driver. So these are the various types of waiting lines. Let's move on to another topic. We discuss the elements of a queue. The strategies to manage a queue emanate from the various components that a waiting line or a service queue has. We shall now look at these elements in the following points. The first such important element of a queue are no one else but the potential customers. The queue is essentially defined by the kind of consumers who line up for a service delivery. Such customers are also known as the calling population. When a queue is planned, it is important to understand their needs and expectations from the service. Now let us take an example. There is a toll plaza and there is an ambulance which needs to pass through a toll plaza. Due to an emergency medical situation, it needs to be passed through the toll lane without any delay. This is in contrast to a normal vehicle plying on the road. Thus, while designing lanes for a toll plaza, arrangements should be made to allow special vehicles or maybe the VIP vehicles to pass without waiting. For this, categorization of the potential consumers in various segments may be done. Hence, depending upon the characteristics of the consumers, queues may be designed accordingly. The second element of a queue is arrival. Arrival refers to the number of consumers seeking a service and the timings expected of their arrival. There may be certain services for which expected time of the consumers may be predicted. Let us take for an example. A bank can expect a heavy rush after 3 days holidays. Similarly, the time of consumer arrival in a day may also be forecasted. For example, it is very likely to have heavy crowd visit a restaurant at a commercial place during lunch hours, whereas a family restaurant can expect a heavy rush during the dinner hours. While a restaurant on a highway can get more crowd even during the morning hours. Further, the service manager may forecast the number of consumers walking in for service purchase in a group. Now, during the lunch hours, the commercial place restaurant can expect a consumer cluster of 1 to 5 consumers, while the family restaurants during dinner may expect a consumer cluster from maybe 2 to 20 members. A movie theater, for instance, may predict a smaller cluster and less number of consumers during the morning shows, while it may get more number of consumers with larger cluster groups during the evening shows. Such a prediction or calculation is very useful in planning a service counter so that a lesser waiting time can be offered to the visiting consumer. Service managers may plan operating more service counters during the peak hours. However, that will be an additional staff with additional cost. We now discuss a very important term in management of the waiting queues. This is bulking. Bulking refers to a decision by the prospective consumer to be in the proximity of the waiting line but not to join the same. This happens when a consumer perceives the waiting line to be long and decides not to seek the service or maybe to come back later. It is important for the service manager to make adequate arrangements to avoid bulking, as it may else lead to losing the business opportunities. Let's take another example. Think of a food plaza where, given a long queue at a particular food outlet, the consumer may feel preferred to buy goods or maybe food from a competitive outlet. Or, observing a long queue at the bill counter of a retail outlet, the consumer defers to buy the groceries from there. Service managers may disguise the length of the queue by dispersing the counters or indicating instructions at the counters about the average billing time. This encourages the consumers to make a purchase and join the queue. Another element of a queue is reneging. Have you ever stood in a waiting line of submitting some bill in a bank and felt that the line is not moving or maybe moving at a snail pace, and then decided to leave the line in irritation as you have next appointment due in some time? In service management terminology, you decided to renege. Thus, reneging refers to a situation when the potential customer leaves a waiting line and prefers not to seek a service instead of waiting for it any more time. For submission of a due bill, the consumer might revert back after some time. But it could also mean permanently losing a customer if it is about purchasing a service instead of servicing a bill. Reneging also causes an atmosphere of negativity around the waiting line, as the consumer who leaves the line may speak or behave in a fashion that adds to the frustration of other waiting consumers. Hence, it is very important to check reneging by choosing a right kind of service queue design so that the service delivery operations are speed up. Let's come to the next point, service counters. One of the most important elements of a service waiting line is the number and location of the service counters operational at a given point of time. There could be different configurations for the service counters. We'll discuss it briefly one by one. The first is a single line, single stage configuration. This design of a service process involves only one point of interaction for the service consumption, and there is only one queue of the waiting consumers. Another way a service counter can be designed is single line, multiple stages. Under this design, prospective consumers will have to form a single line, but the service order and delivery is done through successive stages. Let us take for an example, ordering for takeaway food may include ordering at one point and collection of food at another point. The waiting time at these two stages can be different. The service managers will have to plan the waiting time accordingly. The third configuration of a service counter could be the parallel lines. Under this system, the consumers are segregated into multiple service counters. The line may have a single or multiple service stages. For example, a big retail outlet may have multiple billing counters, which you might have even witnessed. Additional service counters, however, are made operational only during peak hours to save on the cost. We move ahead to another service counter configuration, that is, allotted lines. A service may have multiple segments of consumers. To manage the waiting lines of such diverse consumers, service counters may be allotted to such different categories of consumers. For example, while checking into the airplane, categories may be made on the basis of ticket type like business class or economy class, and thus the queues may be made accordingly. Similarly, there could be separate lines for males and females at the ticket counter of any multiplex. One of the very common ways of configuring the service counters are single line to multiple counters. This is a method of having all the consumers in a single queue. As the consumer reaches the head of the queue, he is directed or he opts to go to the counter which is vacant. This is a very fair method of operating, and it also ensures quick movement of the waiting line. Often, this method makes embankments of the waiting lines with ropes or tapes, and the movement of the waiting line is managed back and forth. Moreover, for a service provider, the system ensures to reduce the reneging as the consumer cannot leave the queue without being served once he joins a queue. The next configuration of a queue could be first come, first served. I'm sure students, you've heard this sentence a couple of times. This is a variation of the standing single waiting line. In this method, the consumer comes to the reception and takes a number or a token. He is free till his number is called for the service delivery. The next configuration of a queue is a combination. As might be clear, it refers to having a multiple basket of the configurations to be offered to the consumer. A service provider may opt for using a combination of any of the above mentioned waiting lines as we've just discussed. The idea is to manage the consumers and ensure a quick service. For instance, at a multi-speciality hospital, the patient may have to register at a single counter. Then he proceeds to a multi-service counter for testing, maybe diagnosis, and then revert again to a single counter for billing and the collection of reports. Let us look at the various designs of a service counter in this figure. If you look at the first figure, is a single line, a single server, and a single stage for the service delivery. On the other hand, in the second series, you find the line to be one, the server to be one, but stages are three, that is, sequential stages. In the third figure, it is evident that there are more than one servers. That means there are multiple servers and hence parallel lines for them. The fourth figure indicates designated lines to designated servers. Servers will be multiple, lines would be parallel, but each line will be allotted to one category of consumers. The next design is that of a single line to multiple servers. Such a design is also known as a snake design. Why? Because the queue will move back and forth in a single line. Having reached the head, the consumer will be directed to multiple servers. He may choose the counter which is vacant or may proceed to the designated counter. The last is take a number design. This means there would be a single or multiple servers. Each person will be served on the basis of number when called for. We come now to the customer selection process. Generally, the consumers in a waiting line are served on first come, first served basis. It is considered to be fair as the consumers who are waiting in a line since long may resent having new consumers come in and served before them. However, there may be formal policies designed to prefer a given set of consumers for serving prior to others. This is also called as queue discipline. For instance, elderly consumers may be preferred to be served prior to others in a waiting line. Similarly, there could be different processes designed to serve a prospective consumer out of the queue. Let us look at these bases one by one. The first such basis could be the urgency of the service. At many service counters, while a waiting line works in a sequence, some consumers may be preferred over others in case they are in an urgent need of the service. We take the example of a hospital once again. Here, the emergency cases may be attended on a priority basis. This is ensured by having a regular OPD waiting line and the emergency arrival section having a separate registration, and such cases are attended on priority basis. We may think of waiting line at the ticket counter of a multiplex. Customers who want to buy tickets for the movie show which is about to be started may be given a priority and they may be asked to buy the ticket at a separate counter. Next comes service duration. That means the time taken for the production, delivery and transaction of the service from the organization to the consumer. The services which may need a shorter time duration for transaction may be separated from the bulk business. Yet another method could be a premium payment. Premium here refers to an extra charge being taken from a consumer for treating him in a shorter line and in a separate queue. Another basis of choosing the consumers for being served prior to others could be the regular customers. For the customers availing of the services more frequently, some token or a pass may be issued which entitles them for being served separately. Such an arrangement is very commonly found at the toll booths by issuing tags. Flexibility is another element. This relates to the design of the service process and the flexibility granted to vary the service delivery system according to the demand of the consumer. For example, a self-service restaurant may offer to table serve in face of long waiting lines on counters. For allowing flexibility, a service manager may design a service flowchart and try to assess the likelihood of occurrence of delays at various stages. Such an analysis can also be done after going through the consumer complaint record of the past. Such bottlenecks should be highlighted and the service personnel should be well trained to overcome a delay at these points. For managing a waiting line, a service manager may work out on the following service design issues. The first is consumer numbers. This is to assess the approximate number of consumers to be served in one go. Depending upon the service, either the consumer will be served individually or in a group. The second is the equipments used. The consumer may be served manually by the staff with equipments alone or a combination of personnel and equipments. Identifying the degree of dependence on technology and amount of involvement of the personnel is assessed before designing. The third such basis is the capacity. For management of waiting lines, it should be evaluated as to how many service transactions can be successfully completed in how much of time. This facilitates in working out the number of customers who can be efficiently served at a time. The next is service delivery location. The manager proceeds with working out the place at which the service is delivered to the consumer. For instance, whether the consumer comes to the service site as in a restaurant or a bank, or if the service is delivered to the consumer's doorstep, as in the case of free home delivery for food or opening the bank account at the consumer's doorsteps. There could be a third location for the service delivery, as in the case of cash withdrawals at the ATM. The last is waiting experience. This refers to the experience a waiting consumer goes through. A smart service manager ensures enough distractions in the comfortable waiting zone for pleasing the waiting consumers. For example, at the car service outlet, drivers may be offered free meals, a comfortable waiting area equipped with mobile charging points, and with magazines and television to keep them occupied. So, students, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. I'll take an example. For enhancing the overall service quality at a bank, a number of consumers were surveyed to find out one basic improvement desired in the service delivery system of that bank. Now, majority of the consumers felt that the waiting time in the bank should be reduced for better services. For managing the waiting time, the bank took a few initiatives. The first one was to improve the service delivery technology. The teller was trained to work on customized softwares where extraction of the customer's details would take just a few seconds from their service station. Currency counting machines were also installed to save the time of the counting of notes and bills. This also saved the time of the teller in each consumer service transaction. Apart from technology, secondly, the bank personnel was trained in expediting the consumer service transactions. They were told to hand over the complicated tasks at the back desk designated officer, which was a new job description created to work on the daily rotation basis to avoid any delays in the service delivery. During peak days, the table lunch was also catered to the employees of the bank, and the overall lunch time could even be reduced to half so that the overall consumer waiting time could be reduced. The third set of changes included the creation of many quick desk services like depositing of checks in the drop box, withdrawing cash from the ATM, checking balance of account online, etc. All these steps taken by the bank ensured that the regular service seeking consumers would be separated from the other consumers, thereby reducing the overall waiting line size. In the brief description, a bank's successful management of waiting line has been described here. Hence, it is important for the service manager to check the waiting time in the service transaction so as to improve the customer satisfaction. Thank you.